All right, we're back, and in this segment, we're going to talk about psychoanalytic theorists and how they explain sex differences. So let's start with our favorite sexist, which is Freud. And I'm calling him a sexist on purpose because he really honestly believed that sex differences in traits were attributable to the differences in our genitals. And he honestly believed that having a penis is what caused males to act masculine, and not having a penis is what triggered these dysfunctional behaviors that we could maybe call feminine behaviors. So he had this very, like male normal, male adaptive, male healthy, female abnormal, unhealthy, not adaptive. So he definitely had that approach to the sexes. He said one of the things that fueled male behavior is castration anxiety. If we go back to the Oedipal complex and we talk about how, the thing that caused the little boy to ultimately repress his lust for his mother and his, aggression towards his father was the fear that his father would castrate him as punishment. And so castration anxiety is what motivated the little boy to get rid of all of those impulses and replace it with identification with the father. Um, Freud thought that not only was that the beginning of the motivation for the development of a masculine gender identity, but that throughout life it would be with a male who's sort of always worried that he might get castrated or be emasculated, was the term that Freud used to refer to a man who was being not treated like a man. So it could be, a psychological emasculation, or it could be a physical castration. But one way or another, the male who has a penis does not want to have to experience that, according to Freud. For females, honestly, they don't want to experience it either. And so Freud said they have penis envy. They wish that they could be treated like males are treated. They wish that they had the power that men have. And so they were envious of the penis that allows men to have all of this power and status in life. So whether you're male or female, the big thing is the penis gives you power. The penis itself actually gives you power in Freudian theory. This is a little different from what Erikson said. Remember, he's the one who had the lifelong series of conflicts that we face and things like that. So a lot of people really like Erikson's theory until they hear this part and they're like, I did not know he said this. But he said that male traits, which oftentimes include things like assertiveness, dominance, aggression, he says, see, those are outward extending traits, just like they're outward extending genitalia. Females oftentimes are described as having traits that are more inward, like being submissive, dependent, agreeable, things like that. And he says, well, that's because they have internal genitalia. So I'll let that percolate for a second, because I feel like that's just kind of a weird thing to say, but okay, it's kind of psychoanalytic, so I'll go along with it, right? The psychoanalytic theorists tend to think it's all about genitalia. Except for Horney. Horney, the one female in the group, she argued that it wasn't the genitals. Yes, it's true that the people that women are looking at a little bit enviously tend to have penises, but she's making the argument that it's about status in society, not about the actual penis. And so I would love for Karen Horney to maybe reappear today in 2022 and look around and see how things are, and see if she wants to adapt or maintain her theory as it is, now that she sees that women do have more opportunity, and that, like, are our personalities, in her opinion, different now that we have more opportunity than our foremothers had. I'd be really interested to see if she still thinks it's that personality is what it is, given that her biggest explanation, from 100 years ago, that women don't have as many opportunities. I wonder what she would say. I'm just kind of curious. We will never know. I don't think. Can she come back? I don't know. Freud's favorite friend Jung, until suddenly he wasn't his favorite friend and he just hated him. Carl Jung actually offered something very different from what Freud said. So this is one of those thorns in Freud's side that caused him to not want to be friends with Jung anymore. So Jung offered the idea that your collective unconscious contains a bunch of, polar traits or qualities. We talked before about like the shadow and the persona. One of those polar traits is the anima and the animus. The anima would be all of your feminine qualities, and the animus would be all of your masculine qualities. And he said that a healthy personality incorporates both, that a healthy personality is not going to try and just squelch one side of themselves or part of their personality. It's going to embrace all of it. And one of the things that he said that I thought was really interesting is that during the reproductive years is when we are most likely to display behaviors that are the most consistent with our sex role. So, if you are female, your sex role tells you to display more animus qualities, more nurturing, more agreeableness, more empathy, all of those things. And he says that's because in the reproductive years, women are more likely to be raising children and finding a mate and doing all the things that require a lot of feminine qualities. And he says, same for males, that during the reproductive years are going to show more animus. They're going to be more bold. They're going to be more assertive, because those are the things that are going to help him to secure a mate, get a good job, be the authority figure in the household for his children, all of those things. He said, when we get to midlife, where now, okay, maybe we're established in our jobs or we've raised our children and, we already have secured our mate. He said, we can start to express the other side more freely. And so you'll see very masculine men start to display more feminine qualities, like wanting to nurture roses or, they're much more cuddly with their grandkids than they were with their own kids. And women, he says, can express more of their animus. And so they can maybe enter into that career field that they had delayed because of childbearing, or they are more authoritative on different subjects, or just sort of in the world, they're more bold and assertive. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing for him to say. Think about it from 1920s, 1930s, for him to be saying that midlife might be something different from the pressures of the childbearing years. And keep that in mind as we move to our next major approach, which is the evolutionary approach. And you're going to see some parallel between Jung and the evolutionary psychology theory. So the thing to remember whenever we're going to try and explain behavior through the lens of evolution is that, whatever gets your genes into the future is what evolution would favor. Whatever behavior, whatever appearance, whatever will help you to survive to the point where you could reproduce, that's going to be preserved. And anything that happens after childbearing, evolutionary psychology really can't say anything about it, because it's all about getting your genes into the future. So it's important to think about, to remember that this theory is a little limited in that way, right? It's only talking about what it talks about. And that is, those traits that are preserved through the mechanism of natural selection. So evolutionary theory says that successful reproduction requires different sexual behaviors from men and from women. So if you think about sperm, so I don't want to get too vivid. I teach human sexuality and sometimes can kind of lapse into very explicit terminology. So I'll try to be, this isn't human sexuality, but if you're interested in that topic, I do teach it, and you can always, I would love to have you in class. Anyway. So sperm in an evolutionary sense is considered cheap or inexpensive because you can always make more. In a single ejaculation, there is somewhere between 1 million and up to as much as 1 million. I'm sorry, I just completely understated it. 100 million and 500 million sperm per ejaculation. So that's a lot of sperm. I think we can all agree that's a lot of sperm. So, and each one has the potential to, fertilize an egg and become, a conception that could grow up to be a baby. So that's what we mean by it's inexpensive. You can always make more. A lot of them get wasted every single time there's an ejaculation. And so it's not risky to make sperm. It's not risky for men to make a baby. Like, they aren't at physical risk when they make a baby. Think about it for women, though. Women, on the other hand, every egg is very valuable because one egg is released per month per woman. And so, you have this huge disparity in how many eggs there are in the world compared to how many sperm there are in the world. So one opportunity per month to conceive per woman. And then once she has conceived, she can't make any other conceptions until she's completed this one, and that takes 9 months. Whereas a male, if he wanted to try and conceive again, he would just have to find another willing partner, and he could start another baby. And he could theoretically, if you had one male trying to, let's say all the men except for one on the whole world died, and all there is a bunch of women and this one male, and the women were willing to try and have babies with him. Let's try and estimate how many babies he could make across that first year. I'm going to say very conservatively 365, or if it's a leap year, 366. I'd say very conservatively, he could make 365 more babies than a woman possibly could make in a single year, right? It's a lot more reproductive capacity in males than in females, right? And so male reproduction is a lot less risky. If he picks a wrong mate, if he picks a woman who is not going to be a great mother, or whose genes are not as good, and so maybe the baby doesn't end up being viable at the end, or something like that, it's less dramatic for him than for a woman, because for him, he could make another one pretty easily. And now I'm talking this is evolutionary theory. A lot of this behavior would be more caveman behavior, less, modern life behavior. In modern life, we don't kind of, on average, act this cavalier as I'm discussing right now. But in, Stone Age time, when there was no knowledge of how exactly babies were made or different things, you could imagine engaging in behaviors that could result in maybe picking the wrong mate for a man, and the baby just never arrives as far as he knows. He doesn't know anything about it, but he's gone off and he's maybe gotten other women pregnant. And so his genes get in the future. Like, that kind of behavior is favored by evolution, right? Having many sexual partners, spreading as many opportunities as you can to reproduce. For women, because they only have one egg per month, and they only have, one opportunity per 9 months. Once they're pregnant, they have to finish that pregnancy before they could have another one. I mean, you can see that they would have to be a lot more judicious in their sexual decision making. And if you think about, like, the fact that every time she's pregnant, it's actually physically risky to her, especially if we're talking about caveman days, it's very physically risky for her. Even today, it's risky in childbirth. We have an inordinate number of women who die in childbirth even today. And so it's still not a safe behavior, perhaps, to have babies, right? Like, it's not the simplest and safest behavior. Not to mention that for some period of time after she's had a baby, she's going to be in a less, powerful state. And so she may need to be cared for afterwards, things like that. So she's going to be more vulnerable. It's going to be in her best interest to pick carefully a man who's likely to stick around and help her rear the offspring, protect her during the vulnerable times of pregnancy and, postpartum. Like, if she picks really carefully, she could end up very successfully raising offspring. Right? If she doesn't pick carefully, she could end up losing her baby. She could lose her life and not ever get her genes into the future. So evolution has favored certain behaviors from males and females with regard to reproduction. So if this is all, let's just take it on face value and say, okay, we agree that's how it is. Evolutionary theory would predict that there would be different personality characteristics that men might display in their effort to attract female mates. And those are different from what women would display in their efforts to attract mates. Men may have different skills as a function of the different demands on them. And women might have different skills as a function of the different demands on them. And so if we see any differences between the sexes, evolutionary psychology would say that they always go back to this sort of basic reproductive difference, how males and females go about finding mates, securing mates, and protecting their own interests and their offspring's interest. So I hope I set that up well enough. What I want you to do next is there's a very brief video with Helen Fisher that you'll see first in the playlist, and she's going to explain a little bit about the evolutionary perspective on this. And then it's going to segue into another video that talks about a really consistent difference between males and females, and that's spatial ability. So I will see you on the other side of those videos.